Okay, so since people make icons, and icons are created in the image of people, I know Tony doesn't want me to ask this. So the question is, Tony, we'll start with you. Who then, settle this debate once and for all. Who is the greatest of all time? And Pablo, I want to hear what you say.
How are you supposed to give Matthias Sindler a fair shake in this? Because we've not seen any footage of him ever playing, right? There you go. Matthias Sindler.
Fred is the greatest of all time.
Fred.
Sadio Mane. Anyway, I mean, just on a serious note, because we talked here about, he's the first global football star. Everybody saw that the greatest goal of the century. It was on television. You could see it. And he's in memes with that life is life thing when he's at Napoli. So he's definitely a mediated star. But is he, let me make my case. Because maybe this will get you guys out of your afraid to tell the people how you feel mode. I think Maradona is the greatest player of all time. It might have something to do with the fact that I was a teenager in the 1980s. But I think if you purely take it on what he achieved, so he takes a national team. How many of you, I know Jorge Valdano was part of it and so on, but how many of you remember or can just offhand name anyone else who was in the team with him in the Argentina national team in 1986 when they won the World Cup? The central role that he played in that tournament. So he took a country that nobody thought could do it, and they won a World Cup. As Pablo reminded us, he won 2 Serie A's, what is the equivalent now of the Champions League and the Coppa Italia, and he won all this with Napoli. He did this at the time that Napoli was not considered Napoli didn't have Michel Platini, Gullit and them were, no, that's later, right? Gullit and Van Basten, I think that's later, but most of the Italian clubs have really good players, and he takes this small club. I think they had almost been relegated the season before, and he takes them to win this thing. He takes Argentina again to the World Cup finals with a bunch of players. I mean, I know some of those players, but the average person won't remember who those other players are. The other candidate that people like to bring up, and Tony's already told us the story about Pele, but the candidate that I think most get the young kids all excited is Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi is the candidate. I'm not disputing that. But where does Lionel Messi play? He plays at Barcelona. I think somebody said the other day that it's he plays it like a big company. He plays it like the biggest company in the world, the biggest multinational. He's playing next to other players that you know who those players are. Then he's never won the World Cup for his country. He's tried a bunch of times, and I think he plays better players, but he's never won it. And then to add insult to injury, the other player that people often compare him with has actually won the European Championship with his country. I don't think that player is as good as him. And I'm putting this on record because my son says that I make excuses. I support Ronaldo. I don't. I think Messi is a better player. But I still think Maradona is the greatest of all time. I'm going to stand by that, and I'm going to stand down.
Okay, who's gonna offer their opinion next? Okay, you know what?
I mean, hey, what I'll tell you is the greatest of all time. It's probably somebody we never saw, or most of the world never saw. My vote goes to.
Oh my God, Tony's so careful here. Tony's so careful here. Come on, Tony, put your card on the table.
Who did you say your vote goes to, Tony?
It's a team game. It's all about context. It's Maradona almost single-handedly, but there was Bertoni, there was Passarella, there was some decent players around him in 82. And by the way, you know what we've not discussed here, which we don't need to, but Maradona was a terrible manager.
I know, it was horrible. But that's not
his terrible managing skills gave us a great clip, which was that Argentina almost fell out of the 2010 World Cup, and they got their ticket to the World Cup in the last minute against Peru in a very rainy pitch in Buenos Aires. We had last minute goal, and so Maradona ran into the pitch and mud it all just like slid on the mud. That was great, great TV.
You know what I wanted to say though, to give my answer, which is, I mean, I will admit that you mentioned this other player that people often talk about alongside Messi. At some stage, that was my GOAT, purely because when I started watching football, he was the person on TV. He was at Manchester United. He was on the rise, and that's the player I latched onto. And of course, I've grown older. I've heard about what he's done, and I'm past that. But what I often think about, and Tony was mentioning this earlier, about how, you know, people on the left often yearn for this era where we had these working class icons genuinely, is that it feels like in the almost post-historical age we live in now, there can't really be any GOAT that isn't anyone that comes before, that is Maradona or someone that's come before, purely because I just feel like the nature of footballing today, and this is a long discussion that we can leave for another show, is that it's become so commercialized, so commoditized, and so on and so forth, that the player who was once in the capital wage labor relation was once more resembling a worker than they were capital. They're now so much resembling capital that there's a distance that's grown between the players and the communities they're supposed to represent and so on. The sport has been disconnected from these communal roots that it once had, that there's no player who could really capture a people's imagination as Maradona did, as the people that came before him. You know, it's, you know, you think of, you know, Hegel when he talks about those great individuals of history, those world historical figures. And we're living past an age where those world historical figures can't even exist, because unfortunately soccer players are just too uninspiring, too alienated really from their labor is the truth of it all. They carry out the craft as this competition that's disconnected from its broader social context. And I think that, I don't know who the GOAT is, but the truth is, I didn't grow up in
a saying it's Maradona. You saying it's Maradona, basically. Without
saying it's probably Maradona, but I didn't live in a time where I could even understand what it means for a football player to be a GOAT. Because as much as I'd like to say statistically it's Messi, Messi isn't that. Cristiano Ronaldo isn't that. No one that I've grown up watching live, grown up watching their careers unfold, can possibly be that. So it's Maradona, just because those who came before me, who knew what it was like to grow up watching Maradona play, say it's Maradona. So that's what I have to say.
I think to add to your point, I think it's very difficult to compare different eras of football because of how they played and how they trained. Probably if Maradona had to train like Messi and Ronaldo have to train right now, probably he wouldn't make the cut in most of the teams right now. So I'm not gonna pick any of them because I think there's no point in comparing who was the better player because they were not playing at the same time. But also I think that when Pelé dies, the reaction in Brazil is not going to be anywhere close to what the reaction in Argentina was to Maradona's dying. And so just for that, I think Maradona had a bigger impact in his life as a footballer and football person.
We still don't know, Tony. Tony says everybody's a GOAT.
No, I like what Pablo said there, because you're measuring his power as a symbol. It's not really. I agree. You can't compare players across eras. You can't. Yeah, I mean, and more than that, I think even where does this GOAT thing come from? Like, in what universe does this whole idea of a GOAT? You know, don't we need to unpack that very idea that football is somehow going to produce, like, you know, the all-time singular individual who's going to transform history by themselves, etc. I mean, I actually think it's a problematic concept, to be honest.
Anyway, we know everybody's got to go back to work, so we don't want to keep everybody. We can this GOAT debate will be like another hour.